Richard Morrison had built an empire. At 58, he sat at the helm of one of New York's most successful investment firms, commanding boardrooms with the same quiet authority that had defined his entire career. But success, he'd learned, had a price that accountants never calculated. This Christmas Eve found him alone in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, the twinkling lights of the city below reflecting off windows that felt more like barriers than views. His ex-wife, Margaret, had remarried 3 years ago and moved to California. Their grown son, James, was spending the holidays with his own family in Boston. The invitation had been extended, of course, but Richard had declined, citing work commitments that didn't really exist. The truth was simpler and sadder than he cared to admit. He'd forgotten how to be part of a family. The next morning, Christmas Day, Richard decided to take a walk. The streets were remarkably quiet, blanketed in fresh snow that muffled the usual city sounds. He found himself drawn to a small neighborhood park he'd passed countless times but never entered. Something about the peaceful morning called to him. He settled onto a bench, watching his breath form small clouds in the crisp air. That's when he noticed them. 3 little girls, identical in every way, wearing matching pink coats that stood out like roses against the white snow. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with blonde curls peeking out from beneath their knit caps. They were playing near a lamppost, their laughter like silver bells in the stillness. A woman stood nearby, her white coat almost camouflaging her against the snowy backdrop. She wore a cream-colored hat and seemed to be watching the girls with a gentle smile. Their mother, Richard assumed. The triplets were engaged in some elaborate game that only children understand, taking turns holding up something colorful. As they moved closer to his bench, Richard could see it was a handmade card, covered in hearts of every color cut from construction paper and glued with the enthusiastic imperfection of small hands. One of the girls noticed him watching. She whispered to her sisters, and after a moment of hurried consultation that involved much nodding and giggling, all 3 approached him with the careful steps of children who'd been taught to be polite to strangers. "Excuse me, mister," said the one in the middle, clutching the card. "Are you alone today?" The question struck Richard with unexpected force. In all his years of business dealings, no one had ever asked him something so direct, so innocent, so devastatingly accurate. "I am," he admitted softly. The girls exchanged glances. Then, without another word, they presented him with their card. "We made this for someone who needed it," explained the girl on the left. "Mama said there's always someone who needs to know they're not forgotten." Richard took the card with hands that weren't quite steady. The hearts were every color imaginable. Red and blue, green and yellow, purple and orange. Some were crooked, some overlapped. All were perfect. Inside, in the careful block letters of childhood, it read, "You are loved. Merry Christmas." "We're Emma, Lily, and Grace," announced the third girl, pointing to each of them in turn. "We're 5 3/4. "That's very specific," Richard said, surprised to find himself smiling. "It's important to be accurate," Emma said seriously, making Richard's smile widen. He'd said those exact words in countless board meetings. "Would you like to sit with us for a while?" Lily asked. "We're having hot chocolate when we get home. You could come too if you want. Mama always makes extra." Richard glanced toward the woman in white, expecting her to call the girls back to protect them from the stranger on the bench. Instead, she gave him a small nod, as if to say the invitation was genuine. "I don't want to intrude," Richard began. "It's Christmas," Grace said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. And so Richard Morrison, CEO, master of the universe, found himself walking through the snowy park with 3 little girls who chattered about everything and nothing. They told him about their cat, Mr. Whiskers, who was very lazy but very soft. They explained their elaborate ranking system for different types of cookies. They asked if he liked snowmen, and when he said he hadn't built one in years, They were appalled. "Years?" Emma repeated. "That's too long." The woman in white, who introduced herself as Catherine Palmer, turned out to be their aunt, not their mother. "Their parents are overseas," she explained as they walked. "Military deployment. They won't be home until March. I'm fortunate to have this time with them, though I imagine they'd rather be with their mom and dad today." "Do you miss your mama and daddy?" Richard asked the girls gently. "Every day," Lily said matter-of-factly, "but Aunt Catherine says that love doesn't measure distance. It just is." Out of the mouths of babes, Richard thought. Catherine's apartment was modest but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable disorder that comes from actually living in a space rather than just occupying it. Photos covered every surface. The triplets at various ages, a couple in military dress uniforms Richard assumed were the girls' parents, candid shots of holidays and ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. The hot chocolate was perfect, rich, and sweet, with marshmallows that the girls insisted on counting to make sure everyone got exactly the same amount. They sat around a small Christmas tree decorated with ornaments that were clearly handmade, each one representing a memory. "That one's from when we went to the beach," Grace explained, pointing to a shell covered in glitter. "And that one's the year we learned about penguins," Emma added, indicating a somewhat abstract bird shape made from felt. Richard found himself telling them about his own childhood Christmases, memories he hadn't accessed in decades. His mother's apple pie, his father teaching him to ice skate in their small town in Pennsylvania, the year he got his first bicycle and rode it through every street in the neighborhood, despite the cold. "Why don't you do those things anymore?" Lily asked, with the blunt curiosity of children. Richard was quiet for a moment. "I suppose I forgot they mattered." "That's sad," Grace said, not unkindly. "You should remember." Catherine made a simple lunch, sandwiches and soup that tasted better than any five-star meal Richard had eaten recently. As they ate, she shared her own story. She was a teacher, unmarried, 43, who'd put her own life on hold to care for her nieces, while her brother and sister-in-law served their country. "Do you ever resent it?" Richard asked quietly when the girls were distracted by a puzzle. "Giving up your freedom?" Catherine looked at him with genuine surprise. "These aren't chains, Richard. They're anchors. There's a difference. Chains restrict you. Anchors keep you from drifting away from what matters." The afternoon passed in a blur of children's games, Christmas movies, and more cookies than anyone should probably eat. Richard helped the girls build a blanket fort, something he hadn't done since James was small. He read them stories with different voices for each character, earning delighted giggles. He taught them a card game his grandmother had taught him 60 years ago. As evening approached and the winter sun began its early descent, Richard realized he needed to leave. But something had shifted inside him, some frozen place beginning to thaw. "Thank you," he said to Catherine at the door. It's been the best Christmas I've had in years." "The girls enjoyed having you," she replied. "They have a gift for seeing people, really seeing them. They knew you needed company today." "I didn't know I needed it," Richard admitted. "The best gifts are often the ones we don't know to ask for." The triplets came running for goodbye hugs, each one fierce and genuine. "Will you come back?" Emma asked. "Can we visit you sometime?" Lily added. "Please," Grace concluded. Richard looked at their hopeful faces and felt something crack open in his chest. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Richard found himself returning to that modest apartment more frequently than he would have imagined. He came for dinner on Thursday evenings. He helped the girls with their homework, discovering that explaining basic math to 5-year-olds required more patience than negotiating million-dollar deals. He attended a kindergarten play where all 3 girls performed in a production about winter animals, their enthusiasm far exceeding their coordination. He met other people in Catherine's circle, neighbors and friends who welcomed him without Question who included him in casual gatherings where the dress code was comfortable and the conversation was real. In February, Richard received the call he'd been dreading on the girls' behalf. Their parents' deployment was being extended. They wouldn't be home until summer. He found Catherine in the kitchen trying to figure out how to explain it to Emma, Lily, and Grace. "Let me help," Richard said. "With whatever you need," and he did. He hired a good lawyer to help Catherine navigate the military family support system. He set up video calls with better equipment so the girls could see their parents more clearly. He created a countdown calendar with small gifts for each week they had to wait, turning the extended separation into a journey they could track together. But more than any material help, he simply showed up. He was there for dance recitals and doctor's appointments, for good days and hard days, for ordinary moments that turned out to be the most extraordinary of all. One evening in April, after the girls were asleep, Catherine poured them both tea and sat across from Richard at her worn kitchen table. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when the girls first approached you in the park, I almost called them back. You looked so stern, so closed off, but then I saw something in your eyes, a loneliness I recognized, and I thought, maybe he needs them as much as they need to share their kindness." "I did," Richard said simply. "I do. You're not the same man who sat alone on that bench." "No," Richard agreed. That man had forgotten what matters. These three little girls in pink coats reminded him. "What will you do when their parents come home?" Catherine asked gently. "When things change?" Richard smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I'll be their family too if they'll have me. I've learned something important these past months. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who you choose, and who chooses you back." When summer finally arrived and the triplets' parents returned, Richard was there at the airport. He watched as Emma, Lily, and Grace flew into their mother and father's arms, their joy complete. And when the reunited family turned to include him in their celebration, when Catherine introduced him as someone very special to all of us, Richard understood what he'd been missing all those lonely years: connection, belonging, purpose beyond profit. The following Christmas, Richard's penthouse wasn't empty. It was filled with laughter and love. The triplets, Catherine, their parents, Richard's son James and his family who'd come from Boston, old friends Richard had reconnected with, and new friends he'd made through his transformed life. As he watched Emma, Lily, and Grace proudly show everyone the special ornament they'd made him, a heart covered in every color. Just like that first card, Richard thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Alone on a bench, successful but empty. Three little girls had seen past his expensive coat and stern expression. They'd seen someone who needed kindness and had offered it freely, asking nothing in return. That gift, more precious than anything money could buy, had changed everything. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest gestures. A handmade card, an invitation to hot chocolate. The simple question, "Are you alone?" And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, the answer can change from yes to no, one kind moment at a time.